The drum kit is without doubt the most important musical instrument of the 20th century, much more so than things like the electric guitar and keyboard. Okay, as a drummer, my opinion might be a little one-sided, but the way I see it is a little like this. I believe the 20th century was the century of rhythm. Now the drums may have only been the supporting instrument through this time, but as fashions and genres changed, the drum kit was the only instrument that was constant throughout these musical movements, providing the beat that helped accelerate each musical movement to popularity. Despite its impressive legacy, however, there is a lingering perception that the drum kit is not a proper instrument, and that drummers just do their thing with no method. Nothing could be further from the truth. Some of this misconception arises because the form of the drum kit is not that obvious, and although there is a standard basic layout, every drummer personalises their kit and the scope for individual design is vast. My aim in this presentation is to explain as many of the important aspects in the development of the drum kit, and to give a short insight into some of the world's most influential drummers. The drum kit has been with us for about 100 years, and acquired its modern form in the late 1930s. But all began when theatre space considerations demanded fewer percussionists covered more percussion parts, as drums, cymbals and tune percussion would be played separately by one or many percussionists. So to try and overcome this problem, percussionists started to play with the idea of using pedals to control certain instruments of the percussion family, like the bass drum. The Ludwig Drum Company created the first workable bass drum pedal, paving the way for what would become the modern drum kit. During the late 1910s and early 20s, drum kits were characterised by the large march and bass drums, and many percussion items suspended on and around them. With special stands for snare drums and cymbals, these kits became known as trap or contraption kits, due to the little table attached to the kit, which was usually hold items such as cowbells, horns or triangles. Traps kits, like the ones you just saw in this video, were primarily used with jazz groups in and around New Orleans. And as this genre developed, so did the drums. And by the 1930s, the standard drum kit started to take shape, with the kit consisting of bass drum, tom-toms, hi-hats, snare and cymbals. With drummers like Gene Krupa driving jazz bands, with this standard kit setup, drums were thrown into the spotlight. And as said in the National Jazz Network, Gene Krupa energised playing with the Benny Goodman Orchestra, and this helped him to become a drumming icon. His influence affected all who followed, to include the type of equipment and drum sizes players used. He helped standardise the drum set that jazz drummers still use today: 24 26-inch bass drum, 14-inch snare drum, 9x 13-inch small tom mounted on the shell of the bass drum, and 16-inch floor tom. With the exception of the bass drum size, this setup is still used by many big band drummers. A very important innovation took place in the mid-1950s that changed the sound and feel of the drum. This was the advent of synthetic drum heads. All recordings made before 1957 feature the sound of drums with calfskin heads. After Remo Belli invented the plastic head, most drummers switched due to the difficulty in keeping calf in tune. On a hot, humid day, the tuning of the drum would be lower because of the moist air affecting the heads. During the winter, when it was dry, the heads would become very tight, forcing the player to wet the heads in order to play on them. Calf tends to respond with a slower rebound with a stick and can feel softer and less abrasive than plastic. Music in the 1960s becoming amplified and louder, drum manufacturing companies needed to change the way they produced their drums. With major transformations such as weight of cymbals increasing in order to compete with the more aggressive music of the time, the Avedis Zildjian company created thicker and heavier cymbals, including their famous line of hi-hats called new beats, which helped penetrate through the levels of volume the amplified instruments created. As the 60s came to a close, more and more drummers began using larger setups that included 3 or more toms, double bass drums and several crash cymbals, such as possibly one of the loudest drummers in the world, The Who's Keith Moon, who used 2 bass drums in order to compete against Pete Townshend's amplified guitars. In the 1970s, toms without bottom heads, known as concert toms, grew in popularity. The idea behind them was that without the bottom heads, there would be better projection from the drums. They were used in recordings and for live performances, and drummers like Phil Collins still uses them today. However, without the bottom head, the drum would lose a bit of its tone. Drum shell construction also changed during the 1970s, when companies began to strengthen the shells, and companies like Ludwig began manufacturing acrylic drum shells, and one of the first players to popularise this new looking sound was John Bonham of Led Zeppelin.